This week we will be covering another sutta. For the last 7 weeks we were covering the Mahā Sutta. And I was thinking as to what might be some of the suttas that could not necessarily match up to the Mahā because it's very difficult, as you saw, because it's so full of so many wealthy and poignant teachings. Nevertheless, I chose for this week a sutta with a theme that often does not get to be associated with Theravada Buddhism. And the word itself is Suññata or Suññata. In other places, several places in the Nikāyas, in the Pali Canon, we see how Lord Buddha is being asked as to how will the teachings of, the Dhamma itself be promulgated and disseminated in the future, in the distant future. And Lord Buddha mentions how in days when the Dhamma starts to wane and starts to slowly die, in a sense, the teachings, the bhikkhus will stop teaching those aspects of the Dhamma that Lord Buddha taught that have to do with suññata, the emptiness. Because it's very easy for us to get caught up in our ideas as to what we think the Dhamma is. When you have too much intellectualism, too much studying and nothing else much to write home about, we start to believe our own ideas. That is the trap that many a commentator falls into, and it is their own trap. But we're fortunate enough to have these suttas. So Lord Buddha, in mentioning his statement, he also is basically urging us to go back to these teachings that don't get that much coverage, that much attention by us. So this today's sutta is from the Majjhima Nikāya, the middle-length Discourses, number 122, the Mahā Suññata Sutta, the greater discourse on emptiness. Sometimes it's translated as voidness, but for me, using the word emptiness is a little bit more meaningful and more full, even though it's empty that it is talking about. So here we have a sutta which covers many areas that are crucial for understanding, our understanding, because it shows us how to live the holy life. It shows us how to practice the path, capital P, which is in essence the middle way. Here we are going to see many tools and ways of application, how to apply the Dhamma that Lord Buddha is giving to help the student progress. There's going to be some very human elements there, relationship-based. And you know how I like to focus on those, because you cannot extract the human relationship from the Dhamma. oftentimes when we study the Dhamma, we think of it as if it is in a vacuum of time and space. These people are almost faceless, even though it's a story, it's a sutta, so we can sometimes somehow understand, but we completely push the human beings out of the picture and just focus on the teachings. And that is doing the Dhamma a great disservice. And that is, again, something we owe to the commentator legacy or tradition, which has done a great harm to the Dhamma. Even though the commentators, some of them have done wonderful task in keeping or even safeguarding some of the Dhamma, but often they're not. So we are being shown here in the sutta the value of living in solitude that Lord Buddha talks about. Straight away from the beginning of the sutta, we see how Lord Buddha is looking at that as an essential aspect of the practice. Again, practice as in capital P. But once a person attains that mastery of staying in solitude, attaining to the fruits of what solitary living can give to a person, then they can go anywhere and stay anywhere, because they have gained the whatever mastery that living in solitude can provide to a person. From where now those fruits I mentioned can exude out from within the person and into the environment, into the surrounding world, society. Because the person now has the ability, has the clarity, the purity, and unshakability. Because this is a path of practice, patipada. Not just data, not just information we can squeeze into our heads and then we can show off, we can ask questions, or we can convince ourselves that we know the Dhamma when we don't. That's where the unshakability part comes in from. It's not the unshakability of one's own conceit. It is the unshakability of the truth that is the Dhamma. So we see a beautiful maturation of the person, the evolution of a person that Lord Buddha is talking about in the sutta, in the form of the Noble Eightfold Path. So here we see almost a step-by-step process of how the Noble Eightfold Path can take a person to Nibbāna. You're going to see, and I'm going to guide you through it, to applying which aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path can get you to which part of the Arya Savaka status of sainthood, nobility, the Arya, the noble practitioner. So we have a lot to cover today, so let us begin. So this is Majjhima Nikāya number 122, Mahā Suññata Sutta. I have personally heard this. At one time, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan city of Kapilavatthu. That was his kingdom, by the way. That's where he came from. At Nigrodha's monastery. Then, when it was morning, the Blessed One put on his robes, and by taking his alms bowl and outer robe, he entered Kapilavatthu for alms. Later, having returned from the alms round and already eaten his meal, the Blessed One went to the estate of the Sakyan Kalakemaka to spend the rest of the day. The Kalakemaka was a noble of the Sakyan clan. He had a territory, he had some huge property, and on it he would accommodate, in most of those days, many of the rich people would often allow religious practitioners to come and stay, and to come and just stay under the trees, or in the forest or out in the open and just practice, because it would be very well protected. It would be very clean and beautiful. So they would see that as a blessing, an added blessing to their property. And it added more serenity to the whole atmosphere. So during that time, many beds and other accommodations were arranged on the estate of the Sakin Kala Khemaka, the Kala Khemaka's property. On noticing this, the Blessed One reflected, there are many beds and other accommodations arranged within the Sakin Kala Khemaka's estate. Many bhikkhus must be staying here. So the beds and other accommodations is in reference to the new lodgings that are being provided for bhikkhus that Lord Buddha noticed. He didn't see the bhikkhus, but it doesn't say that he saw them, but he did see their, in a sense, living quarters. Yes. So meanwhile, the Venerable Ananda was at the home of the Sakyan Ghata. This is another Sakyan, working on preparing robes. Then in the evening, having come out from his meditative seclusion, the Blessed One went to the home of the Sakyan Ghata. And once there, he sat on the prepared seat and addressed the Venerable Ananda. Ananda, many beds and other accommodations have been arranged within the Sakyan Kala Khemaka's estate. Are many bhikkhus currently staying there? Bhante, yes. Many beds and other accommodations have been arranged within the Sakyan Kala Khemaka's estate. For there are indeed many bhikkhus currently staying there, because it happens to be the time for the preparation of robes, Blessed One. So from that statement, we know that what we're talking about is our current time period, meaning this time of the year, October and November, because this is right after the Vassa period, where the monks have been given the Katina robe and they're preparing robes, mending robes and all that. So this is the time when bhikkhus would traditionally do it. So Ananda is saying, Bhante, yes, it is the time for preparing robes. So these monks are here to work together in preparation for their robes. And you can kind of, from the response that Lord Buddha is going to give to what Venerable Ananda said, you can get a glimpse of perhaps even the tone with which Venerable Ananda said that. Because who's given them these timelines after all? Lord Buddha. Lord Buddha was the designator of these time periods. October, November, the Vassa, all these things, these guidelines were given to us by Lord Buddha. So obviously Lord Buddha knows as to what time period this is. But the way that Venerable Ananda responded, one might not be too far off, I think, in deducing that perhaps he was giving him attitude. He was giving Lord Buddha an attitude, perhaps. So one might be forgiven for assuming that. Because let's see what Lord Buddha says. Ananda, the bhikkhu does not shine when he longs for companionship or when he is attached to, delights in, indulges in, is fond of, or yoked to being with company, or wanting to surround himself with social activities and settings, rejoicing in and enjoying being within society's noise. So basically, stop socializing. That's what Lord Buddha is saying to Ananda. We don't use the Dhamma as a means to socializing. The purpose of the Dhamma is not to be an excuse for socializing. But we are social beings, so oftentimes we like to flock together. People of, of similar interests. This is in all walks of life. And in Dhamma circles, it's no different. But it is supposed to be different. That's what Lord Buddha keeps telling us, reminding us, instructing us. Because oftentimes the socializing aspect itself makes us think that we are practicing. That's why people go to the temples, they hang out, they do the rites and rituals bit, the traditional motions, they go through the motions, as they say. And then after the ceremonies, the rituals are done, they go outside and maybe have, after the monks are served food, they have their own lunch, their own meal, and their own wonderful period of socializing that they've been looking for all throughout the week, all throughout the month or months. Well, how is that different than going to church? How is that different than going to any kind of a social gathering? People want to hang out. Years ago, I heard one comedian say how going to church is equal to, well, not equal to, but the whole purpose of it is to dress up nice and to compare clothing. Well, that is not far off when we also talk about Dhamma circles. Even going to Dhamma talks or on retreats, we have to be very careful. Is it the companionship that I'm after? Is that what I delight in? So we have to get the priority straight. And Lord Buddha continues, because Ananda, for a bhikkhu who longs for companionship, or when he is attached to, delights in, indulges in, is fond of, or yoked to being with company, or who wants to surround himself with social activities and settings, rejoicing in and enjoying being within society's noise, it is definitely impossible for him to easily and quickly experience the happiness that comes from seclusion and from renouncing the world. The delight of enjoying true peace, that is, the serene contentment of awakening. Lord Buddha is saying, as long as you enjoy socializing, you're going to have a very difficult time to truly experience happiness. Because once you've walked away from that social setting, now there is the absence of that, which is going to be dukkha for you, which is now going to make you want to reignite that, to repeat that whole experience. So now you start counting the days until you gather again next week or whenever. That's why you have so many people in temples, traditional temples, so engaged. I even know people in robes, monastics. That is their life, organizing events, different things, different activities, putting the ornaments, putting these lights, chanting this and that. And I'm sitting there in the corner under a tree saying, okay, when is the Dhamma going to kick in? Because that is the whole show for them. Well, Lord Buddha is saying it's not going to take you to happiness, to true peace. But for a bhikkhu who does not long for companionship, or when he is neither attached to, nor delights in, nor indulges in, nor is fond of, nor yoked to being with company, nor wanting to surround himself with social activities and settings, neither rejoicing in nor enjoying being with society's noise, it is definitely possible for him to easily and quickly experience the happiness that comes from seclusion and from renouncing the world, the delight of enjoying true peace, that is, the serene contentment of awakening. Now, renouncing the world, for some people, especially lay people, that might be a little bit off-putting because they think, well, then is it impossible for me to attain that true peace that Lord Buddha is talking about? No. And this is the kind of a statement that some people have, even monks, have misinterpreted and therefore misrepresented the Dhamma by informing the laity that they themselves can never attain awakening because they're not renouncing the world. Well, that is wrong. Because even if you are so-called on the surface, a person who has renounced the world, that does not mean much because you might be very much in the world. That is, the world might be very much in your heart, in your thoughts, in your planning. Nothing to do with the Dhamma. Whereas a layperson in the midst of the hubbub of society, from work meeting to another board meeting, with deadlines, paying bills, they might actually be living with the Dhamma, more so than any of those other monastics. So renouncing the world here, Nibbāna or Nekamma or Viveka, all these words, their connotation is to bring the person back into oneself, instead of looking outside of you for gratification, for delight. Your source, your true source of peace is not outside, but you're looking for it on the inside, where true experience of happiness and joy takes place, where awakening takes place. So it's a change of focus. Otherwise, anybody who has so-called renounced the world on the outside should have already attained, right? If we use that logic, and that is not the case. 99% of monastics are not awakened. They're putujanas. Let's be clear on that. 99%. You do the numbers. And I cannot say that about laity. The percentage is a lot greater for awakened ones. Why though? Because they don't look at face value. They don't look at the superficial aspect of renunciation. Therefore, Ananda, for a bhikkhu who longs for companionship, so Lord Buddha here is repeating that first portion where it says, where he's confirming that it is certainly impossible for him to enter into and remain in the state of freedom of the heart that takes place in stages and is temporary, he says. He can't even get to that level, to stages, of sensing freedom, let alone the state of freedom of the heart that is both unshakable and permanent. This is for the monk who's looking for companionship. So Lord Buddha is saying, forget about it. He cannot even get to the minor, mundane levels of so-called freedom, let alone the unshakability of the mind, of the heart that is permanent, Nibbāna. So, Ananda, I do not see a single thing that in one way or another does not cause the person delightedly attached to it or longing for it a sense of grief, lamentation, pain, and suffering, due to the fact that the thing in question will never remain the same. It will degenerate and come to perish. Anicca. One of the aspect of being deluded is to look at something that is impermanent and to somehow hope that we will find the thing that is permanent. When we're attached to something that is impermanent, that means it is conditioned on so many different things, compounded by so many different things, and somehow expect there to be something that holds a selfhood, a oneness, a fixedness, an entity that is unchanging. That is delusion. So obviously, delusion doesn't come without, delusion is not something that is very passive. No, it has everything to do with pain, with suffering. So many times people think of moha, lobha, dosa, moha, the three defilements, the kilesas. We look at moha as something that, yeah, it's just, I don't know, like a shadow somewhere in the back of the corner of the room or something. It's not that significant. Yes, it affects other things, but it's not, no. Because of that delusion, because of moha, there is suffering. That's why there is suffering, in fact. Because it's not necessarily just because we're holding on to this thing that we don't want to change that is causing us suffering. No. Why are we holding on to the thing in the first place? Because we have the delusion, the ignorance, that by holding on to this thing, it will not slip through my fingers. You're holding on to quicksand and expecting that to turn into some type of a metal or something that is solid, unchanging, but there isn't such a thing. And that itself causes us much suffering because life doesn't care what we think about it. So we have to look at it in a fair way, in a mature way, and see the connection between suffering and delusion. It's not passive at all. Lord Buddha continues, however, Ananda, the Tathagata has discovered a state of being where the bhikkhu, by not attending to any signs or interests whatsoever taking place in the heart, establishes himself internally in the state of utterly serene emptiness. So this is the prelude. This is where Lord Buddha is going to now open up and turn this theme that many people have turned into something so abstract. And this goes way back into the beginning of the division between the schools of thought in Buddhism. Later on you have the Mahayana, where they turned this into, Vasubandhu and all these other people who came in, and many people attributed what this division was as the head being Nagarjuna, and they considered him to be the head of the Mahayana type of a thing. Some even claimed that he was equal in stature to, in the Buddhist history, to Lord Buddha. Some people have even said that. It's all ignorance, because many people don't understand that Venerable Nagarjuna was actually quoting the Pali canon. He was using the suttas. So if anything, Venerable Nagarjuna was in fact very much of a Theravada. But many people, even Theravadan countries, think of that as blasphemy. And but that takes us into a different area of research and things, but we'll get into that some other time. But we have to understand that Lord Buddha is talking about suññata in applicable terms. How is that relatable to us in our practice, and can that practice take us deeper? So now, whenever the Tathagata is in this state of being and is visited by bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, male or female lay disciples, kings, chief ministers of kings, or those representing other faiths or their disciples, the Tathagata speaks with the intention of dismissing them. That is, when the Tathagata is in that state of serene emptiness, when people come and talk to him, it means that he's not in some type of a deep jhana as such, where he's cut off from his sensory input. He's communicating with them, but he's not taken by those. His heart is set on the emptiness, and he is seeking for the moment to come when these people have left. This because the Tathagata's heart strongly leans towards being secluded, turning away from engaging with the noise of crowds or company, delighting in renunciation. Remember, earlier I was saying how the solitary life is necessary to create growth in the practitioner, in their evolution of the mind. But once that mastery has been achieved, like in the case of Lord Buddha, you're going outside and you're connecting with other people, you're communicating. But that doesn't mean that you get lost in companionship. Your heart is set on wanting to be secluded. Even amongst the crowd, you're secluded, you're safe, you're away from noise. Therefore, Ananda, the bhikkhu's inner longing should be, may I enter into and stay within myself in that state of utterly serene emptiness. In order to accomplish this, Ananda, the bhikkhu must be settled and relaxed internally, without creating any internal tension, as he brings the heart to a restful single point, becoming entirely collected and without any agitation. One of the criteria for experiencing Nibbāna is the mind that is devoid, empty of any agitation. And in order for you to go deeper in meditation, you cannot be creating any state of tension. Remember, for 6.5 years, Siddhartha Gautama was doing that, and he was getting nowhere. It was only when he saw, even as a child, as an infant, when he went into the jhana, and he did so only because he allowed, he opened up, he relaxed. And that was the attitude that he brought forth later when he was 35 years old under the Bodhi trees, that, so I have to be relaxed internally, yes. Without creating tension, yes. Without agitation in the mind, yes. And with that resoluteness, he went deeper and deeper, more so than he had ever gone before. And how, Ananda, does the bhikkhu become settled and relaxed internally without creating any internal tension? The bhikkhu, by secluding the heart from any sensual desire, free from all possible unwholesome thoughts, with thinking and pondering still working in the background, enters upon and remains in the first jhana, with joy and pleasure being experienced throughout as the result of his seclusion. So this is the first jhana. This is how you go in it. This is what happens. You have thinking and pondering, vitakka vichara, and there's joy and pleasure. It exudes everywhere in the body. In fact, as the person goes deeper into it, there's going to be not even a single millimeter square in the body that is not vibrating with joy, tingling. So, but that is not the end. Some people get stuck there because it's so nice. But we have to move on, because this is just a cookie. This is just a candy that's given to us for the good work that we've been doing. But you cannot do that if you're still thinking about sex, for example. If you're still thinking about beautiful music or some type of a sensuality, or craving for it, or pushing away something. But you cannot do this without being secluded. Later, with the stilling of thinking and pondering, he enters upon and remains in the second jhana, which brings with it self-confidence and singleness of mind, in the absence of thinking and pondering, but with joy and pleasure born of the growing collectedness of mind. So as the mind is getting settled in samadhi, the joy and pleasure are still there, but they're there because of the samadhi now. And there isn't that chit-chat in the mind. You're not planning, you're not thinking about anything. And the mind is becoming more and more focused. And there's the sense of confidence that's growing, self-confidence in yourself, basically. There's this level of faith. Then, with the fading away of joy as well, his experience of equanimity becomes more pronounced than before. So now equanimity is rising, while remaining mindful and fully aware, still feeling some pleasure within the body. He enters upon and abides in the third jhana, on account of which noble ones announce, mindful throughout, he dwells equanimously in bliss. Afterwards, with the abandoning of both pleasure and pain, and by having already gone beyond joy and worry, he enters upon and remains in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure within it, except for the purity of mindfulness, due to the strong presence of equanimity. So these are the rupa jhanas. These are the form jhanas having to do with the body. So you're constantly cross-referencing all these experiences with the body, but they are taking you, as we see here in the fourth jhana, to the arupa jhanas. Sometimes they're called aninja, and we have a aninja sutta in the Anguttara Nikāya, which I have covered a few months ago while I was in Malaysia. And it talks about the arupa jhanas, or formless attainments. And that's what Lord Buddha's walking us through the jhanas in this way. Ananda, it is in this manner that the bhikkhu becomes settled and relaxed internally, without creating any internal tension, as he brings the heart to a restful single point, becoming entirely collected without any agitation. So that was his how-to method, basically. It is at this point that the bhikkhu begins giving attention to the inner quiet state of emptiness. But while doing so, it may so happen that his mind neither springs forward to it with confidence, nor becomes settled in it, nor is freed by it. When this is the case, the bhikkhu should be fully aware of this fact by reflecting. As I am giving attention to the inner quiet state of emptiness, my mind neither springs forward to it with confidence, nor is becoming settled in it, nor is it, therefore, freed by it. What this is sati sampajanya. This is vipassana, in fact, because the person is aware, is seeing things as they are. Yatha bhutang pajanati. You're seeing what is happening. You're seeing, you're looking, you're assessing also, because you need information. And the information gathered here is, the mind doesn't seem to be prepared to dive into emptiness. It still has this perhaps lack of faith, a lack of confidence. So when this is happening, you don't cover it up. You address it as it is. And that's what the monk is doing. Thus, he becomes fully aware of his state of being. You're not adding anything. You're not subtracting anything. You're just aware, like Bahya. See it for what it is. Don't add anything. Don't subtract. Becoming aware of this, the bhikkhu then begins giving attention to the external quiet state of emptiness, followed by him giving attention to both the internal and external quiet state of emptiness combined. So internal was, you can think of it as the body or the mind. External could be the body and the outside world. Okay? And then combined means both at the same time. So you're working on two levels. This is followed by him giving attention to the imperturbable state of the heart. But while doing so, it may so happen that his mind neither springs forward to it with confidence, nor becomes settled in it, nor is it freed by it. When this is the case, the bhikkhu should be fully aware of this fact by reflecting. As I am giving attention to the imperturbable state of the heart, that means the formless attainments, arupa jhana. So he's gone to the fourth. So is he able to go in? He's seeing that he's not. The mind, for some reason, is not feeling trusting enough to let go, to help the process do its thing. And this is a thing which many times students want to go to the next level by pushing. And I have to remind them, well, what got you to the fourth jhana in the first place? What really allowed you to really find yourself in that space? They say, I guess I just gave up. I just said, whatever happens, happens. And I say, what do you think is, why do you think it's so different now? because they've gotten so accustomed to one level of attainment, they think that methodology should apply to the next one, but they want to maintain that. Well, the whole method that allowed you to experience newer and newer things, newer levels, was because you gave that up. So that requires a level of humility from us. So when this is the case, the bhikkhu should be fully aware of this fact by reflecting that he is not able to go into the imperturbable state of the heart, aninja, as I said. Thus, he becomes fully aware of his state of being. At this point, the bhikkhu should use as his object of attention whatever sign, nimitta in Pali, he had previously used. It could be the breath, it could be an image of light, it could be a kasina, it could be whatever that may have helped the person as his meditation object to become settled and relaxed internally without creating any internal tension, allowing him to bring the heart to a restful single point, becoming entirely collected without any agitation. Then the bhikkhu again begins giving attention to the inner quiet state of emptiness. And while doing so, his mind springs forward to it with confidence, becomes settled in it, and is freed by it. So it's like acclimating. Like when mountain climbers go up a steep mountain, when they get to the base camp and they have to now really rise in elevation, there's going to be less oxygen, however, and that will put tremendous pressure on the brain, on the body. You will get exhausted faster. Metabolism is going to be severely affected. Not enough oxygen for the brain. Lungs will struggle, and you will experience tremendously powerful, painful headaches, among other discomfort, uncomfortable situations. So what many people will do, in fact, is to come down a few meters and then go back after some time. So it's 3 steps forward type of a thing and 2 steps back. And then you're still ahead by 1 step. So that is what's happening here. You're allowing more room in yourself, confidence-wise, faith-wise, and trusting yourself as you're creating enough of a base, a foundation of equanimity. The mind is experiencing less and less agitation. And that is the reason why you're able to go deeper. And when Lord Buddha says, when this is the case, the bhikkhu should be fully aware of this fact by reflecting, as I am giving attention to the inner quiet state of emptiness, my mind springs forward to it with confidence, becoming settled in it, and is therefore freed by it. In this manner, he becomes aware of this fact. So you're observing this. So every time you're reading this section, think of it as the bhikkhu or the person applying vipassana tactics. You're seeing it with insight. You're seeing it with clear eyes, vipassana, penetrative insight, looking deeper. Becoming aware of this, the bhikkhu then begins giving attention to the external quiet state of the emptiness, followed by him giving attention to both the internal and external quiet state of emptiness combined. This is followed by him giving attention to the imperturbable state of the heart. And while doing so, his mind springs forward to it with confidence, becoming settled in it, and is freed by it. So instead of pushing yourself forward, even with an agitated mind, you have to really take a few steps back, observe, what am I working with? I want to bulldoze my way through into the jhanas or into the higher states of mind. That is the worst thing you could do, because you're just creating more tension, agitation, fire, basically. However, here we see in this example of Lord Buddha giving us this example of a bhikkhu who took a few steps back and assessed his situation, saw that his mind was not jumping into that state with eagerness, trusting the process with confidence. So you go and reestablish yourself in the state of peace that he had gained by applying the method of meditation that allowed him to go through the first 4 jhanas. And then he would approach, because it's not the very smooth ride, at least in the beginning stages, for a person to go from jhana number 1 all the way to jhana number 8. So you have to go back, always a few steps back and then forward, but keep moving with trust. So when this is the case, the bhikkhu should fully be aware by reflecting, as I am giving attention to the imperturbable state of the heart, my mind springs forward to it with confidence now, becoming settled in it, and is therefore freed by it. Now, when we say freed, some people think of this as the ultimate freedom of Nibbāna. No. But the mind, the brain, in fact, needs to be, again, acclimated to the sense of Nirodha. So in the practice itself allows us, gives us a purview, gives us snapshots of tiny little Nirodhas here and there. Every time you're practicing the method of just relaxing, releasing the tension, smiling, and coming back to the object, just observing, uplifted state of mind, settling in that, the quicker that becomes, the more it becomes natural, and the more you will begin to see the Nirodha here, Nirodha there, Nirodha here, Nirodha there. Everywhere there is Nirodha, but all around. When you draw a straight line, sometimes we think that it is a straight line. But when you zoom in with a magnifying glass or maybe even a microscope, you will get to see that, in fact, it is just a mere series of dashes, dots, placed together in one trajectory, that when you zoom back and it's thick enough, you will see it to be a straight line. So we have to allow the mind to grow within the experience of release. So when we read that portion where it says freed by it, it is not a reference to Nibbāna, supreme. So just a side note there. While the bhikkhu stays with whatever is being experienced, if he feels like walking, then he walks, while remaining continuously alert as he reflects. Here we see the 4 postures of the Kaya Anupassana, of the Satipatthana, being reintroduced. So we start with the walking to and fro. So you can practice while allowing the mind to be so settled and so equanimous. Practice the body contemplations. In this case, Lord Buddha first uses the example of walking. And then the person is reflecting. During my walking, no wrong or unwholesome desires of coveting or of harm will seep into my heart and overwhelm me. Thus he becomes fully aware of his state of being. This is not samatha practice merely. This is now combining. You're practicing the insight. Insight, another thing about, I need to mention here, insight, many people think of it as a revelation, some divine, some type of a thing that falls from the sky, and all of a sudden you're different and there's glowing things around your head. None of that. You just see it. You go like, oh, wow. That's it. But it changes you deeply. It's almost like having different set of eyes, fresh eyes. and you're no longer the same person. But these have to be done in continuously, basically, done as in practicing sati and sampajanya. It has to be there because panya is growing thanks to the sati. So you're walking, your movement, and now we're going to see also, thus he becomes fully aware of his state of being, and if he feels like standing. So now we see the standing portion. Many people forget that when we're doing walking, there's also the aspect of standing at 2 points, at 2 intervals, at the end point. Don't just automatically, like a machine, like a robot, go into this motion of walking back and forth. That's not doing it justice. Take a moment. In fact, take an entire breath when you reach that end point of the walk. Do I have sati? Is sati with me? Am I experiencing the calm? And am I seeing any thoughts that come in? And some of them are not going to be wholesome. Some of them are going to be just like, where did that come from? That's just unwholesome. That's evil. That's not you. It's just, remember, you have countless eons of wrong lifestyle. It doesn't go away. The sankharas are going to keep coming and coming and coming. That is not you. Remember anatta. Don't personify. Don't look at it as, oh, this is me. How could I be doing this? I'm supposed to be on a retreat. All that nonsense of judgmentalism, just put it aside and see things for what they are. Oh, that's a thought. That's a thought. Oh, yes, that's an unwholesome thought. I don't need to dwell on it. Boom, just stop paying attention to it. This is when you have to practice asati towards that thought. Okay? Asati is the opposite, meaning inattention. All right? Or amanasikara. You're not giving it attention. The problem is we give attention to it as we're pushing that negative or unwholesome thought away. And now we're more enmeshed in it. And now the mind is more agitated. You see what's going on here. So the mind has to not be agitated. That's priority number 1. During my standing, no wrong or unwholesome desires of coveting or of harm will seep into my heart and overwhelm me. Seep into is different than occur. What many of us do, even if the thing is passing in front of our window outside of our home, metaphorically speaking, of course, the mind, it's just a thought. We grab hold of it and we start fighting with it and saying, how could you be passing through my mind? You're an evil, unwholesome thought. What are you doing here? And now we've allowed it in. That thought was not, was minding its own business and we dragged it in. We take things too seriously. So be mindful of that. And don't say, well, I'm supposed to be a meditator for so many years. These thoughts should not be happening. Well, who said so? Why shouldn't they? It's just the Dhamma. It's just Dhamma as in nature. It's just occurring. Remember the sankharas. They're going to keep flowing. Your papanchas are not going to be disappearing from one day to the next simply because you want to practice vipassana or meditation. You have to learn how to work and maneuver around them. And thus he becomes fully aware of his state of being. And if he feels like sitting, then he sits while remaining continuously alert as he reflects. During my sitting, no wrong or unwholesome desires of coveting or of harm will seep into my heart and overwhelm me. Thus he becomes aware of his state of being. And if he feels like lying down, then he lies down while remaining continuously alert as he reflects. During my lying down, no wrong or unwholesome desire of coveting or of harm will seep into my heart and overwhelm me. We're still practicing the sangvaras. We're practicing restraint. Restraint is essential. Without restraint, Nibbāna is impossible. Okay, let me repeat that. Without restraint, Nibbāna is impossible. In fact, way before Nibbāna occurs, a decent human life is impossible without restraint. That's why we practice Sila. Sila is not for bhikkhus only. Sila is for everyone. In fact, if you want to live a healthy life, you need to have Sila. If you want to have a protected life, you need to have Sila. You need locks on your doors, don't you? You don't go to sleep with your doors wide open, your gates wide open, your car door wide open. You don't. That is practicing restraint. You're taking ownership of the protection of your mind, of your heart. So these things will come. Keep yourself protected. Don't be pulling this in, don't be pushing that out. That's why we say neither coveting, nor desiring for, nor pushing away. Thus he becomes fully aware of his state of being. Here we need to acknowledge the fact that according also with the commentaries on the sutta, we see how with the four postures, one is taken straight to Sotapatti. Some of you might be interested in how to become a noble disciple, in how to become a stream winner. Well, there you go. Practice the four postures with sati, with sampajanya. And you're in. That's what we see this here. That's another thing that Lord Buddha kept on saying when Venerable Anuruddha was asked again and again and again. In the Samyutta Nikāya, you have an entire section dedicated to Venerable Anuruddha talking specifically on the wonderful qualities of applying the Satipatthana. After becoming an Arahant, he's being asked again and again. Not just by laity, but also by bhikkhus, notable Arahant bhikkhus. When they come and ask, Avuso, friend, how did you attain? Well, he says, I've been practicing the Satipatthana everywhere I go. Whether I'm lying down, sitting, standing, or walking, I'm there. So that is the quickest way to attain Sotapatti. See if you can maintain it for 1 hour. How about 1 minute? And then extend that, extend that, extend that, and see if you can push it to 24 hours. Meanwhile, your mind is being completely cleansed. Unwholesome thoughts are not seeping through anymore. If they do, you're catching them and tossing them out again. You don't want to get your hands dirty. So, but here, in this as a criteria, or as the criteria for attaining Sotapatti, here we see the presence of Sammasati, of the Noble Eightfold Path. Remember earlier I was saying the applicability of Noble Eightfold Path is being shown clearly in the sutta. So here we have within it the Sammasati portion of which is right mindfulness being applied. Next, we get to see the intentional action that one takes ownership of one's own speech, which, as mentioned, I think it was last week, I was saying how it is not just the action of talking that one is experiencing and what you do with that speech portion where you're the author, but also when someone else is talking and you're on the receiving end, meaning in your hearing and listening, there too we need to apply samma vaca, which is right speech. Because samma vaca is not about the speech, the speaking part, but also about the listening portion of the speech. they go hand in hand. So you're not passively sitting there seeing things or happen to you. So let's come back to the sutta. And if he feels like talking, then while remaining continuously alert, he reflects. During my talking, I will not converse on such low and vulgar topics as ordinary people do. Talk that is not noble, unbeneficial, and thus pointless. I will not engage in talk that does not lead to relinquishing, to disenchantment, to cessation, to contentment, to direct understanding, to enlightenment, and to Nibbāna. So whatever he's going to be talking about, it needs to be, the target of that conversation should be leading there. That's how he's thinking. I will not talk about kings, robbers, ministers, armies, fearful dangers, wars, food and drinks, clothes, beds, flower garlands, fragrances, relatives, chariots, villages, cities, towns, kingdoms, women, heroes, gossip at the street corner or at wells, water wells. I will not engage in talking about those who are dead and gone, or discuss the beginning or ending of the world or the ocean, nor talking about things that should or should not happen. So pretty much everything that we're engaged in on a daily basis, not to do those. But we know how difficult that is. When you're talking with someone, sooner or later the conversation goes to politics, to climate, to relationships, to something other than the Dhamma. Thus he becomes fully aware of his state of being. Instead, Ananda the Bhikkhu resolves, during my talking, I will converse about abstaining as I talk on things that are beneficial and helpful. Thus, I will engage in talk that leads to relinquishing, to disenchantment, to cessation, to contentment, to direct understanding, to enlightenment, and to Nibbāna. In this manner, I will talk about having fewness of desires, contentment, seclusion, non-attachment, and withdrawal from seeking company and social interactions. Talk that inspires, arouses effort, develops virtuous character, collectedness of mind, and wisdom, all leading to the full understanding of freedom and the vision of freedom, jnana dassana. So what, in essence, the person is, at this point already, is reached a point where they are free from the 5 hindrances. Okay? And if the hindrances are there, you're going to be kicked out of your jhana. But it's not just the jhana that we're addressing here. We're also talking about real life, engaged practice. Remember, capital P, practice. Thus, he becomes fully aware of his state of being. And if he feels like thinking, then, while remaining continuously alert, he reflects. During my thinking, I will not dwell on such low and vulgar thoughts as ordinary people do. Sometimes some commentators have said, what was it? Basically, thinking like animals. Thinking like animals. Instinctual, with no restraint. Vulgar thoughts, anything that comes to mind, anything that comes to your lips, to your mouth, you just spew it out. And you don't think, twice about it. And you don't look back. But these are thoughts and concepts that are not noble, unbeneficial, and thus pointless. I will not engage in thoughts that do not lead to relinquishing, to disenchantment, to cessation, to contentment, to direct understanding, to enlightenment, and to Nibbāna. In this way, I will not entertain thoughts of sensuality, of hatred, and of harming. All this is saying one thing: I am going to work on my intentions. Because this is the purification of one's own thinking. Remember, it's not just sati. In order for sati to become samma sati, it also needs to have samma sankappa. You have to have the right attitude, the right thinking process, the right intentionality. That's why this path is very clear on when we talk about mindfulness. It is specific. It's not the mindfulness that people like John Kabat-Zinn and other people have been promoting. Be mindful, or Eckhart Tolle, all these characters that have been making a huge, dynasties for each of themselves, selling this, monetizing mindfulness. This is not that. The mind, the intentionality has to be pure. And that also has to be constantly there. It's not just a one-time thing. You don't just set the intention in the beginning and you forget about it. No. That's why sati will always look back at the intention, because the tendency of the mind is, especially in the presence of sankharas and papanchas, they will always come with a little bit more added forcefulness to them, because it's like a muscle. You're gaining more muscle mass. Think of it like that. And you cannot go and continue using the 5-pound dumbbell, because your body has developed tolerance to it, because now there's more muscle thanks to those 5-pound dumbbell. Now you need to increase it to 15, to 25, to 35 to increase. And that's what we're working towards. So sati looks back at samma sankappa. It needs to see that it is there. That's why Noble Eightfold Path, you cannot remove any of them and say, I'm okay with samma sati and that's fine. Well, no. Right livelihood has to be there. Right speech has to be there. Right effort has to be there, etc. Thus, he becomes fully aware of his state of being. Instead, Ananda, the bhikkhu resolves, during my thinking, I will engage in thoughts that are beneficial, noble, and emancipating, that help lead one out of suffering, out of samsara. That is, thoughts of relinquishing, of non-harming, and of loving kindness. You have to give your mind, your practice rather, a trajectory. Otherwise, you will fall into this space of inertia in your practice, whether you're sitting meditation, or you're walking meditation, or you're on a retreat. Because sometimes I've seen people just want to be like, if you have a car or you take your car to a car wash, and there's some car washes in parts of the world where you pull up into this machine, this housing place, and you keep your car on neutral, you take it off the brakes, and the person says, okay, pull your hands away from the steering wheel, and we got this. You just sit there, and the car's wheels, the front two wheels, get locked into this almost like a belt. It's like it pulls the car forward, and you're just sitting there like in an amusement park, and it just pulls you, and the car gets to be treated. Well, you're not going to be treated on a retreat. Okay? You're not going to be sitting there in meditation and allow things to just unfold and you're just there. This is not any of the other traditions. This is the path of practice. And it is a path. In order for you to be on a path, you need to have eyes. You need to have legs. You need to have intentionality to be on a path. And you need to be practicing with the help of intention and thinking. That's why we have to be alert. So sometimes people come out of a meditation and say, wow, I must have actually gone into cessation of feeling and perception. Well, I asked some questions and I realized that they didn't. They're so far away from anything like that, remotely. Why? Because they were in the world of dullness, of sleepiness, of absent-mindedness, drowsiness. They were basically that car that's going through a car wash. The only problem is with that is the car is actually going to get washed, but we're not. When it comes out from the other end, we're still going to be very deluded and think maybe even that, oh, wow, I've attained. Yes, I have attained. No, you haven't. For that, we need wisdom to be with us. And wisdom will never stay with us or even show up if there isn't any sati. Remember, sati and panya work together. They need to be there. Sati is the thing that says, hey, do you think there is enough with the help of Dhamma Vichaya there working? What was that? Was I actually paying attention? Or was I just zoning out? Insight is not going to happen when there's tinhamidha, when there's sloth and torpor. It's never going to happen. So the thoughts you must be able to be in charge of. So it's very active. It's not passive. So you need to introduce thoughts of relinquishing, of non-harm, of loving kindness. That's why metta is not a passive affair. It requires so much from us. Thus, he becomes fully aware of his state of being. So now, after the person has completed both aspects of, two other aspects rather, of the Noble Eightfold Path, meaning Samma Vacha, as I was saying earlier, and Samma Sankappa, right thought or right intentions, now the person has become a Sakadagami. With these two joining, Sammasati that you saw earlier, that takes a person with the help of the four recollections of the four postures of the body, with Sammasati, now being joined with Samma Vacha. So you're taking ownership of your speech and your right intentions. That is the quickest way to attaining to stage of Sakadagami. Further on, there are these 5 strands of sensual pleasure. What are these 5? So once the person has now gained understanding, depth of understanding, and has insights, now we go and move into the next phase. And if you're doing, just looking at it in a linear fashion, Sotapanna, Sakadagami, now we know what's coming next, Anagami. An Anagami stage or non-returner stage cannot occur without you also coming face to face with any of the attachments that we have with the 5 chords of sensuality, the 5 senses. So, because these 2 stages are requirements for attaining Anagami stage. So what does what are these 5? So further on that, there are these 5. What are these 5? Forms that are recognized by the awareness of the eyes that are enjoyed, are pleasurable, agreeable, and which provoke lust to arise in the heart. Forms, as in visible objects. Could be color, it could be shape, combination of both usually. Next, sounds recognized by the awareness of the ears that are enjoyed, are pleasurable, agreeable, and which provoke lust to arise in the heart. Odors recognized by the awareness of the nose that are enjoyed, are pleasurable, agreeable, and which provoke lust to arise in the heart. Flavors recognized by the awareness of the tongue that are enjoyed, are pleasurable, agreeable, and which provoke lust to arise in the heart. Touches recognized by the awareness of the body that are enjoyed, are pleasurable, agreeable, and which provoke lust to arise in the heart. So you're observing all these 5 chords of sensuality. These, therefore, are the 5 strands of sensual pleasure. To this end, the bhikkhu should strive by constantly checking in and scrutinizing the state of his heart while asking himself, is there any delight or subtle excitement whatsoever arising within me, affecting my behavior. Whenever there is an interaction with any of these 5 strands of sensual pleasure, as bhikkhus, Lord Buddha gave us a roadmap, especially when it came to, obviously, something as simple as eating. We're always checking ourselves. Am I, well, especially when we're sitting about to eat the food, we're checking the mind, the quality of the heart in relation to the food, especially if it's a food that you've been used to eating and you haven't had for decades, and now somebody brings that. If the bhikkhu is practicing well, if there is sati, if there is sampajanya, they are not missing that beautiful opportunity to check and see, ooh, is there delight in the mind? Is there any subtle excitement which indicates the presence of agitation in the mind? Because it's going to affect behavior. Even before I became a bhikkhu, for years I used to observe monastics, and there, many of them actually, the infatuation with food, so much talk given to food amongst the bhikkhus, because I lived around and was trained with bhikkhus, by bhikkhus. So I would observe them as a layperson, because I wasn't allowed to become a bhikkhu because my father refused to give me his permission. But that didn't stop me from interacting and growing up with bhikkhus. So I would observe, and I would just be stunned at the extra layer of interest when it came to food. But Lord Buddha is saying, ask yourself, is there any delight? Every time I'm coming in and interacting with the sensual pleasures, the 5 strands of sensual pleasure. And obviously it goes to touch, to smell, etc. And if there is ananda, the bhikkhu then knows immediately that there is in fact delight and excitement arising within me, affecting my behavior, whenever there is an interaction with any of these 5 strands of sensual pleasure. By becoming fully aware of this, the bhikkhu reflects. This means that desiring or lusting after the 5 strands of sensual pleasure has not yet been given up in me completely. In essence, the person knows that they are not an anagami yet, because they detect that there's this drive to pull them in, to suck them in to the experience of the sensuality, whatever it is presenting itself. In this manner, ananda, the bhikkhu becomes fully aware of his state of mind. However, when having reflected and known for himself that there is in fact no delight or excitement arising within me, none affecting my behavior, whenever there is an interaction with any of these 5 strands of sensual pleasure, then ananda, by becoming fully aware of this, the bhikkhu reflects. This means that desiring or lusting after the 5 strands of sensual pleasure has been given up in me completely, and the person knows for oneself. In this manner, ananda, the bhikkhu becomes fully aware of his state of mind. So, by having completed one's training within the 5 strands of sensuality, in essence, by abandoning them, at this point, the person has become an anagami, a non-returner. So now we have covered the 3 stages of nobility, the sekhas, disciples in training. Now, as you can deduce, we're going to go to the next level, which is arahantship. And for that, we need to use, Lord Buddha was a master at giving us what tools work for what stage. So here he's going to be presenting clearly the Panchupadana Khanda, the 5 grabbing aggregates, like I like to call them, or aggregates of clinging sometimes people use. Further, Ananda, there are these 5 grabbing aggregates, which the bhikkhus must closely observe, carefully examining them to see them clearly, their point of appearance and disappearance as they arise and cease. So you're seeing them for what they are. Aggregates, remember, Namarupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. So form, feeling, memories or perceptions, thoughts association, mental associations. Then you have the sankharas, the habitual tendencies, or sometimes called preparations or formations. And then you have the vijnana, which is consciousness or sense awareness. So you're seeing them as whatever they are. And then you're even more so, you're seeing their point of arising. When do they show up? And you're paying close attention to see, quietly observing from the back of the room, as it were, seeing them disappear. You're not taken for a ride by them. You're not convinced by what they're trying to tell you. You're seeing them for what they are. Yatabhutang pajanati. To know, pajanati. You know it. Thus, while closely observing the tangible form, which is rupa, the bhikkhu knows and understands this is a tangible form. It is in this way that tangible forms arise. It is in this way that tangible forms cease and disappear. So we now see the advanced level of training here, because the bhikkhu has moved from the 3 stages of sainthood and now has the necessary tools of insight to take them to full breakthrough. So next, as you guessed, we are going to encounter Vedana. Lord Buddha is addressing that. Similarly, the bhikkhu closely observes feelings as he knows and understands. This is a feeling. It is in this way that feelings arise. Now remember, feelings are of 3 characters, right? Pleasurable, painful or unpleasant, and neutral. All right? But pay close attention to the neutral ones, as I was saying in the beginning of your meditation today. Unfortunately, we think that the neutral ones are nothing to write home about. They're pointless, they're meaningless, have nothing to do with the practice. They have everything to do with the practice. If you recall from the Majjhima Sutta, some months ago I covered with you, in it we see the seamstress, the one who stitches. So the mind is actually enjoying going from one extreme to the next. From the painful, we run away, scurry out towards the pleasurable. And because of impermanence, anicca, sooner or later, it's not going to last. Boom, we go to the opposite extreme. We avoid the neutral ground as we avoid the plague, as we say, right? But that is where the middle portion of it is. That's where Nibbāna occurs. Just stay with the neutral. And the seamstress, which is craving, is defeated. There you go. So remember, the feelings have these 3 flavors. So you're seeing them as, oh, you're a feeling. Yes, you're a Vedana. I see you arising. Yes, yes, yes. I see the painful feeling. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, this is, and it disappears. Anicca. Similarly, the bhikkhu closely observes memories or thoughts as he knows and understands. Observes the sanya. This is a memory or a thought. It is in this way that memories and thoughts arise. It is in this way that memories and thoughts cease and disappear. Similarly, the bhikkhu closely observes habitual tendencies as he knows and understands. This is a habitual tendency. It is in this way that habitual tendencies arise. It is in this way that habitual tendencies cease and disappear. Similarly, the bhikkhu closely observes sense awareness as he knows and understands. This is sense awareness or consciousness. It is in this way that it arises. It is in this way that it ceases and disappears. While observing and closely seeing in this manner the appearance and disappearance, the arising and ceasing of the five grabbing aggregates, the conceit I am gets dispelled within the bhikkhu. Excuse me. As this occurs, he becomes aware of his state of mind while understanding. The conceit I am, connecting me to the five grabbing aggregates, is dispelled in me. So you're seeing, oh, I am better than him. I am less than him. We are equal. That conceit, comparing and contrasting, is diminished to a point where it doesn't exist anymore. And the bhikkhu knows this. Just like earlier, when he was noticing if there were any unwholesome thoughts coming in, or him restraining himself from them, he was aware of them. Similarly, he's aware. But it's interesting because in our culture, everything revolves around I am. A child is being promoted to find an identity. And we cherish that identity. We grow, we have titles around that. More and more layers, cultural layers, this layer, that layer, educational layer. Because the world that we live in celebrates asmimana, which is the conceit I am. But that is the very thing that will stop us from attaining to the highest fruits of the Dhamma. We will not be allowed. Our ignorance, thanks to asmimana, will stop us in our tracks. So something has to be dropped, and that is conceit. And by the way, it is also one of the five higher fetters, the last five, which the anagami has to work through. And you cannot attain arahantship without dropping all those five fetters, the upper fetters. Ananda, you must know that these things are completely wholesome and good, with entirely wholesome and good outcomes. He's referring to all these techniques of reflecting back, checking back, seeing, do I really not have conceit in me? Earlier I was saying, don't sugarcoat it. Don't cover anything up. See it for what it is. And Lord Buddha continues, these are wholesome and good, with entirely wholesome and good outcomes, for they are noble, transcending this world, inaccessible to those that are evil. And we have a lot of evil in the world today. We have to acknowledge that. So at this point, because when the asmimana drops, the person has become an arahant. Because when it drops, all the other five drop as well. One of them, the big one, is avidya. And disciple no longer is called disciple in training. Aseka, he is now called an aseka. Gone beyond the training, having completed it. Further, Ananda, what do you think? What could lead a disciple to eagerly want to follow the teacher, even if the teacher were to chase him away? What would drive a student, a disciple, to stay with the teacher, even if the teacher is trying to kick him out of his door? So Lord Buddha is now changing directions in a sense. He's now addressing the teacher-pupil, teacher-student, teacher-disciple relationship and what constitutes a healthy one. Basically, what is expected from the student? And what does the student have to demonstrate to maintain that relationship? It's not a, once you're in, you're in. No, the student has to display, because the teacher is invested tremendously in chiseling away the darkness, the evil, the illusion, the ignorance, and the stuck-upness of the student, not to want to let go of what they think they should be doing. Well, if you know what you should be doing, then you're definitely not a student. You're apparently a teacher because you know what should and should not be done. You don't need a teacher, basically. So the student has to constantly be working on oneself to deserve the Dhamma being shared by the teacher. To deserve. We must deserve the Dhamma. It's not something that we should get. It is our right. No, it's not. Because we are working against so much ignorance. We're in inertia. So we have to crawl out of that inertia, that ignorance. Then we deserve it, because that's what we mean by deserve. It takes work. That's what I'm trying to say. Bhante, so he asked a question and Ananda is answering. Bhante, our understanding of the Dhamma is rooted in the Blessed One, for he is our refuge and guide. It would therefore be excellent if the Blessed One could explain the meaning of this to us. Then, on listening to it being taught by the Blessed One, the bhikkhus will all remember it and keep it close to their hearts. They will memorize it. Ananda, it is not correct for the disciple to follow the teacher for the sake of mere explanations or for listening to his discourses or to hear inspiring verses from him. And why is that? For a long time now, Ananda, you all have been listening to me teach you the Dhamma, which you then recite verbally yourselves, committing them to heart, intellectually examining them and practicing them so to penetratingly see their truth for yourselves. However, these are not enough. For disciples should follow their teacher because he instructs them with talks that lead to relinquishing, to disenchantment, to cessation, to contentment, to direct understanding, to enlightenment, and to Nibbāna. Students come to listen often to validate what they have been thinking about, what they've been analyzing, what they have been dissecting in their mind, what they have most usually, it's commonly what they have accumulated from having read, studied, gone to different Dhamma talks, collected, etc. So they need a validation. Many students have that. That is at the foundation of conceit. And so long as there is conceit, there is no growth. It's like a child or somebody who's hungry and is standing in front of the pastry shop. You will smell it, but you will never be able to taste it. And your hands are against the window pane, to the point where you will convince yourself that you've eaten those cookies, those delicious pastries there that you see from 20 meters or 20 feet away. But you have not tasted even a tiny little slice of a cookie, so long as you're holding on to them. But the moment that you are willing to really listen to a teacher and start to let go, throw away those hang-ups, your collections of discourses, of the interpretations of the Dhamma, then you're going to be walking into the pastry shop and taste them for yourself. That is what a good student does. In this manner, the teacher inspires and encourages them to have fewness of desires, to have contentment, seclusion, non-attachment, and withdrawal from seeking company and social interactions, with teachings that inspire, arousing effort, developing virtuous character, collectedness of mind, and wisdom, all leading to the full understanding of freedom and the vision of freedom. Therefore, Ananda, it is for the sake of these things that a disciple should eagerly want to follow the teacher, even when the teacher were to chase him away. That's how eager the student has to be. That's how. Today I see some teachers, monks, who are catering to the students, just not to lose them. numbers, not to lose, obviously, the financial support, the acknowledgement, etc. You see even this in the life of Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahā Candana, as Kolita and Upatissa, with their teacher. He was so happy with having a few students around him. That gave him a sense of, recognition. So the disciple also has to know who is it that they are following or studying under. So, but in spite of this, there may come a time when a teacher faces his undoing, or the disciple may face his undoing, or when the holy life becomes undone. Undoing, undone, being undone is basically a debacle, collapse of these individuals in question in this case. So Lord Buddha is going to clarify. And how can a teacher face his undoing? It is when a teacher, while living secluded in a remote place, at the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a mountain cave, a charnel ground, in a jungle or forest, in an open space, or while sitting on a heap of straws, being thus alone, is visited by Brahmin householders of various towns and regions. In their presence, the teacher becomes enticed by what he witnesses, which wake in him old tendencies of being infatuated, with constant longing and unwholesome desires being reignited, all leading him to experience a life of luxury. As a result, he is ruined, falling back into his old ways, becoming corrupted again, ending up in future rebirths, instead of ending the rebirth cycle. In the first place, why he even is wearing the robes. So there it goes, to show that it's over. Experiencing more and more suffering with unending cycles of aging and death for him to face. This is what is meant by a teacher facing his undoing. There is danger in solitude when the whole entire purpose of solitary lifestyle, even a temporary one, is not fulfilled or even addressed properly, which happens by asking oneself first, why am I even here, really? Why am I here in my kuti? Why am I living alone? We have to be able to question that. Sometimes I've seen, actually a lot of times I've seen on social media, monks or even laity who go on retreats, in the case of lay people, yet somehow their camera is right there, their phone is next to them, and they keep snapping pictures. This is my kuti, yes, this is where we go to eat, this is, look how beautiful the sunset is. Why are you there in the first place? Or in the case of bhikkhus who would go into jungles of Sri Lanka and other places, and they look for the perfect shot in front of a waterfall, a nice angle, this and that. Oh, I can use this shot for a nice calendar piece. You're a monk. You're miles away from society. What are you doing? Where is the solitary life going to kick in to this scene? Because there is no solitary life there. You're all over social media. And even if you're not using those modern equipment, how is the mind? Because at the time of Lord Buddha, this was also happening. The mind, that's why the teacher is now undone, because he was not working on the genuine reasons why he is living the solitary life. He's looking at the lay people while he's drooling with envy, with lust. And how does a disciple face his undoing? It is when a disciple, living by the example of his teacher, dwells secluded in a remote place, at a root of a tree, in a mountain, etc., etc., being thus alone, is visited by Brahmin householders of various towns and regions. In their presence, the disciple becomes enticed by what he witnesses, which wake in him old tendencies of being infatuated, etc., and all leading him to experience a life of luxury. As a result, he is ruined, falling back into his old ways, becoming corrupted again, ending up in future rebirths, etc. So this is the case of a disciple facing his undoing. And how does the holy life become undone? The holy life itself. It is when a Tathagata appears in the world, an Arahant, a perfectly awakened one, endowed with sublime knowledge and supremely pure conduct, the well-gone, the Sugata, the knower of worlds, the incomparable tamer of those to be tamed, the teacher of gods and humans, enlightened and blessed. And he lives secluded in remote places at the root of trees, a mountain, a ravine, a mountain cave, a charnel ground, in a jungle or forest, in an open space, or while sitting on a heap of straws. Then, while being thus alone, he is visited by Brahmin householders of various towns and regions. But the Tathagata does not become enticed, nor succumbs to any thoughts pertaining to desiring a life of luxury. However, someone being inspired by the Tathagata, wanting to emulate him, starts living secluded, dwelling in remote places at the root of trees, a mountain, a ravine, a mountain cave, a charnel ground in a jungle or forest, etc. But he becomes enticed by what he witnesses when encountering Brahmin householders visiting him, which wake in him old tendencies of being infatuated with constant longings. So as a result, he is ruined, falling back into old ways, ending up in future rebirths, experiencing more and more suffering. This is what is meant by the holy life becoming undone. It must be said here, Ananda, that the undoing of the holy life is the worst among all three, for it has much more painful and bitter outcomes, even leading one into rebirths in the miserable hell realms. So, Ananda, behave towards me with friendliness and not with resentment and anger. This validates what we were saying in the beginning, when Lord Buddha approached Ananda and said, why are there so many beds and accommodations? And he said, Bhante, they're here because it's the robe preparation time, and etc., etc. So now Lord Buddha is addressing Ananda specifically, directly, saying, Ananda, behave towards me with friendliness, not with resentment and anger. As a result, you will gain much happiness and enjoy well-being for a very long time. Such a personal account that says so much about the mental state and behavior of the Venerable Ananda towards the Blessed One, doesn't it? That's what I pick up. And how, Ananda, do the disciples of the teacher behave with resentment and anger towards their teacher instead of behaving with friendliness? Here, the teacher generously shares with them the Dhamma, as he does so with care and loving compassion, while encouraging and advising them. This will result in you gaining much happiness as you enjoy well-being for a very long time. But his disciples neither attentively listen nor lend an ear to him, nor put the effort to understand what is being taught to them. Instead, they keep their hearts closed and thus turn away from the dispensation of the teacher. In this way, Ananda, the disciples of the teacher behave with resentment and anger towards their teacher, instead of behaving with friendliness. So from the master's own comments, we see the relational dynamics going on behind the words. So maybe even the bhikkhus, And how, Ananda, do the disciples of the teacher behave with friendliness towards their teacher instead of behaving with resentment and anger? Here, the teacher generously shares with them the Dhamma, as he does so with care and loving compassion, while encouraging and advising them. This will result in you gaining much happiness as you enjoy well-being for a very long time. And his disciples attentively listen or lend an ear to him, putting the effort to understand what is being taught to them, because they realize how rare of an opportunity this is. Thus, they keep their hearts open and do not turn away from the dispensation of the teacher. In this way, Ananda, the disciples of the teacher behave with friendliness towards their teacher, instead of behaving with resentment and anger. And now we see such a personal and such a powerful set of instructions coming up next from Lord Buddha. So when I was reading this and translating this, I was like, whoa, this is so compelling. So let's see what Lord Buddha says. So, Ananda, behave towards me with friendliness and not with resentment and anger. As a result, you will gain much happiness and enjoy well-being for a very long time. But remember this, Ananda, I will not pamper or baby you. Like the potter works with fresh and wet clay, I will constantly press you, admonishing and chastising you as often as necessary. That is what a legitimate teacher does. If they are true teachers, and they're coming from a genuine place of knowing, of understanding, and trying so hard to teach the student, they will not spare anything, including so-called jeopardize the relationship of the student with them. They do not place the importance of what this student represents for me, because the teacher doesn't have that concept anymore. I'm gaining something from this person. No. The potter who's working with wet clay has to be very careful with their nails, this and that. You have to be very, it's pampering, it's soft. You have to have a soft touch, this and that. It's wet. You cannot be so crude in your handling as you would, let's say, when you are holding that pot that's been pulled out of the kiln or the oven. It's dry then. You can hold it up, it's heavy, this and that. You can maneuver it without worrying that you're going to scratch it or put a dent in it. No. So Lord Buddha is saying, don't expect me to baby you. I use the term that is more contemporary when I'm translating this, because it drives the point across much clearer. Same with pampering, because we're living in a time period where everybody wants to be pampered, especially students. I've had students who walked away simply because they didn't like the way I was stern with the Dhamma, with what I expect from them. The teacher is not going to cater to the conceit of students. The student is there to try to learn. The humility has to be there for them to learn. Otherwise, why are they there? So Lord Buddha doesn't care. He's saying, I will not walk on pins and needles around you, like walking on eggshells around you to please you, so that you write me a better check. Your zeros don't get less in your donation. He doesn't care about any of that. He just says it like it is because he is full, he's Mahā Karuna. He's allowing them to hear the Dhamma. He's walking hundreds and hundreds of miles to get to, like in the case of Pukusati. Hundreds of miles he walked. I think he walked about 350 miles to get to that one particular student. How many teachers today could do that? That's why even the best of mothers cannot even come close to the love that Lord Buddha demonstrated towards his students. Even the best, most dedicated of mothers towards their only child cannot even come close to the love shown by Lord Buddha to his students. So he's saying, show some friendliness. Don't look at me with angry eyes, Ananda. As your teacher, I will speak to you and instruct you in this manner, Ananda, so long as your core can withstand my admonishment, so long as you can handle it. And you learn to grow and develop through it. Basically, your spine has to be strong to handle the pressure I'm going to put you under. Because sometimes the dirt is so thick that it has petrified. It's no longer mud, it is like rock. But the careful teacher is going to use the chisel with his own patience, but the chisel has to be diamond-like in its strength, because he's going to be using a sledgehammer sometimes. And if the student has the right merits, has the desire to learn, has the right Dhamma Chanda, then they will put up with that, because the teacher is giving from their whole life to share with them the Dhamma that he had come across with so much toiling, so much difficulty. And he's now so generously sharing. This is what the Blessed One said, and the Venerable Ananda was moved with delight in listening to the Blessed One's words. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. A powerful sutta. Powerful sutta. One that oftentimes is not, if there is enough sutta explorations being done around the world, but it's not being made available to students to be exposed to, because there's, as you saw, there's so many elements about it that are so relatable. Many teachers and students, especially students, can, oh, okay, Lord Buddha said that? Oh, yes, he did. Okay. That's one of the reasons why we have to go back to the suttas. Instead of being mesmerized by this teacher or that teaching, and make our own judgment call based on that. So I will pause here and see if there are any thoughts, comments, questions.
Bhante, I have a question.
Yes, Joe, go ahead.
So when it comes to practicing seclusion, either with the body or the mind, how can a lay person, with family, with his work, how can he practice that? Is it just when he's practicing meditation, be it, sitting meditation, walking meditation, or are there other ways for him to actually practice this so-called seclusion?
Yes, a good question. Remember, Lord Buddha mentioned how being secluded internally, secluded externally, and secluded both internally and externally. Yes, the seclusion externally is what we normally understand when we hear solitary lifestyle, solitude, seclusion. Yes, that's part of it. That's the external part. But it becomes a winning combination when you include the internal seclusion. What do I mean by that? Every time you are legitimately and fully experiencing, or with sati, with real mindful alertness, awareness of what is going on in the body, in the mind, in your feelings, what perceptions are coming and going, when did they show up? Oh, are you staying with them and seeing them vanishing? That is practicing seclusion, Joe. Every moment of legitimate sati is a legitimate moment of seclusion. Can you wrap your mind around that? So you don't have to shave your head and go into a kuti. You don't. You don't even have to take the 10 precepts. You don't. You can continue living your life as a layperson with your own responsibilities, but add the factor of mindful alertness, sati sampajanya. Can you stay with that sati when you're angry on the road? When someone is talking with you on the phone and they really push your buttons? Can you hold yourself back from reacting? From saying, oh yeah, I'm going to give you a piece of my mind now. Already, it already indicates that the mind is agitated. It's starting to bubble up. You're no longer in seclusion, by the way. You're out. Because when you're in seclusion, when we need to look at these words. When we look at seclusion, why do we seclude ourselves? So things become more apparent. If you've ever spent time walking in nature, alone, in a park, in a forest, or even better, if you've spent the night in a tent or at a campground, and there aren't people around you, suddenly you might hear the cicadas or the rustling of the wind, of the leaves, or you might even start to hear your own heartbeat sometimes. You start noticing things. What is happening? Your seclusion has allowed the noise to be excluded. Society is noise. Now, as you're gaining more and more momentum in your practice of sati, you're gaining more mastery in solitude. You see that? Because that monk, that Lord Buddha said, even the teacher, the student, they've been practicing alone. And the householders came, and all of a sudden, the solitude went out the window. Because they were like, wow, yes. So many people, monks, especially from the West, have gone to, let's say, Thailand, and they become monks. 1 year later, 2 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, suddenly they disrobe. One person I was talking to, and I was curious, and this is before I was a monk. And I said, what happened? Oh, I just met the right person. I was like, what? He met the person, a woman, who basically what he's talking about is sexual attraction. He was attracted. His sati was not there, plain and simple. He was not practicing solitude, plain and simple. There was no sati. So please pull yourself away from the old, I would say, wrong view that solitude only happens if Joe is in the kuti somewhere dressed up in monk's robes or on a retreat. No, that is incorrect. So bring the solitude into your life. Every time you breathe, every time you're aware, if you have metta towards you or not, you are practicing a moment of seclusion. How does this interpretation work for you? Does it help?
Yeah, if I'm getting you right, I think you're saying that when you have sati, you're really with yourself.
Beautiful. How you described it is perfect. Because we're away from ourselves. That's why you can only be with others when you know how to be with yourself. Because you've met the good, the bad, and the ugly about you. Very closely, you know who you are. You know what ticks you. You know all your faults, basically. Everything that's been going on. You're no longer hiding anything from you. And therefore, you're not hiding anything from others, which most people are doing. It's all imagery. It's all superficiality. So when people say, oh, they want to fall in love. They want to love someone. They want someone's love to come and fill them up. You cannot fill someone else's emotional reservoir. You cannot give someone love when they don't know what it is. You might burn from both ends of the candle, as they say, and no dent is going to happen to them as far as understanding what love is. They will not recognize it. Why? Because they don't know the means of giving love to themselves. And another way of looking at solitude is being able to allow yourself to experience depths of love for yourself that is unprecedented. That is unprecedented. In the Anuruddha Upakilesa Sutta, for example, where Lord Buddha, this is after the Kosambi incident, when he went to speak with Anuruddha Kimbila, Venerable Anuruddha, Venerable Kimbila, Venerable Nandiya. When you read that sutta, there's so much love towards each other because they have love for themselves. You can only give metta to someone else if you have it towards yourself. Otherwise, you're just faking it. Faking it. Because it has to sustain itself. And not only that, it will have to spew out. It gets so full, the cup gets so full, it inevitably flows out. And that's where mudita is going to happen. You cannot even help it. You see someone else giving dana, and you yourself, who's sitting over here somewhere, miles and miles away from that person, but you hear about that person having done dana. It moves you so much that you start crying with joy for them. You had nothing to do with this. That means you have tasted the juiciness of solitude, the wonder of solitude. And then somebody can come and pluck you out of that kuti and put you in the middle of, I don't know, the craziest city, maybe Tokyo, right? In the middle of that, I forgot the name of a very famous road, which is, so many cross lanes coming through, thousands of people walking every minute. And you will still have that beautiful smile of solitude available to the whole entire universe, with full of love. Unaffected, because you have tasted mastery of living in solitude. That monk I mentioned who left, let's say, those monks rather, they've never tasted it. They did it in spite of themselves. Maybe the look, maybe the hype, the fad, all these things. So please know that it has to do with you, the solitude. It doesn't have to do with the external world. Yes, if you have the luxury, you have the ability, wonderful. Do those retreats, because they will really strengthen that understanding, the beauty of seclusion. It will take it to a deeper level. That's why I encourage at least doing a one long retreat once a year. That is my goal, to have a place where I can do year-round retreat with students. Because everyone needs this now, especially at this time period, dangerous time period we're living through. Okay? without deviating much. So I hope that was helpful. So I
Thank
will
you,
stop,
Bhante.
of course. I will stop here because my throat is really, unless there's a pressing one question, maybe I'll see how long I can. Yes, yes, Ravi, go ahead. Hopefully it's a short one.
Yeah, Bhante, you mentioned something about Nibbāna, Viveka, and basically that solitude which you're talking about, it can be seen in the breath as anapanasati. I like to ask a question on this. When we take an in-breath and we take an out-breath, in between this in-breath and out-breath, there are two turning cycles. A process of in-breath turning into out-breath at the point of inhalation, and a process of out-breath ceasing into a new becoming of another breath cycle. At that two junctures, there are certain space of lullness, as what Bhante you put it just now. It is about expanding that space. And I find this interesting because I find this very comforting. However, the question which I like to ask you is, in our metta practice, which Bhante has asked many of us to do in the last retreat, do you see the metta in the in-breath, or do you see the metta in the out-breath, as in giving and receiving? What is what, Bhante?
Both. In fact, it is nonstop. It is nonstop. The example you gave is lovely as far as the breath goes, but I'd like you to open up the limitations of that image of the breath being a perfect rendition of the moment of, of that lullness or that openness. Because the same thing one could say about the walking meditation. Earlier, I was talking about there is no walking without standing meditation in it somewhere. In fact, 2 points, right? 2 ends. You think of it as 2 pegs, and there's a line that goes through, holding it. So as you're walking, you reach that end point. Let's say you've reached those 10 feet or 10 meters, or whatever the distance is that you're walking. As you're about to turn, it's so full of potential. It's an entry point or a gateway for unwholesome thoughts to come in. It is a gateway for the mind to lose its sharpness. It is an opportunity for ignorance to take dominance again. Because it is a perfect place for the mind, the sati, to escape. For you to lose whatever you've been working on during those 10 steps or whatever. So using the image of the breath, you can easily apply it to the walking, because that's why it's much more difficult to apply sati to the walking compared to the sitting. In fact, much more difficult than the breath even, to see those moments, the gap in between the inhale and the exhale. It's like a tennis ball that you throw into the air, and poof, what happened? There's a lot going on there. But not to be pulled away, not to get into the analytical thinking mode, which many of us can fall into. And that's why sometimes when people, I'm going to go back to the walking meditation, so I'm going to use that instead of the breath, because it is much more poignant, and it has steps to it, in far more detail. Meaning, I've had some teachers in the past who would say, even before one foot comes off the ground, you're watching the thought and you're labeling it. That was the Mahā method. You're labeling it before your heel takes off, for example. And then the arch lifts And then there's lifting of the toes. And then moving it forward. Well, it can easily fall into the analysis mode. If you're going to want to break it down into the actual component parts, it might actually take you days to count the steps. So, but at the same time, you might fool yourself into thinking that you're practicing sati sampajanya. That is what is dangerous about doing the noting. Lord Buddha never taught noting. So in your question, I caution you not to drop into that, okay, what's happening here, what's happening here, what's happening here in the breath. So be careful of that, because that's very similar to a person who's saying noting here, noting, moving, scanning. I had one person say gliding in the air, one foot is up in the air, and then watching the mind. And I tried this for a few years. My head started to hurt. And I'm like, what is this? Where is sukha? I'm actually adding more dukkha. Where is the sukha? So that easiness in your practice has to be introduced. Otherwise, there's so many steps involved. I remember about 30 years ago almost, well, 25 years ago, when I was studying to become a yoga instructor, when we got to the anatomy portion, when we looked at the anatomical structures going to different modes in a certain asana versus others, the person who was presenting it to us, the teacher, told us that her thesis was on a simple act of holding the doorknob, turning it, and opening the door. Her whole entire 250-page thesis was breaking down all the anatomical, kinesiological, muscular structures, the joints, the arteries, all the stuff that were going, 250 pages for that simple act. Don't create another thesis, Ravi. Ease up, loosen up. That's the relaxed step. Watch the breath. Let the breath move with your sati. Be curious, be open. Because even in the walking meditation, you can go into a jhana, in case you'd like to know. But first you have to prepare the ground with the sitting. And even as Lord Buddha was saying, as he was conversing with the householders, when the mind is in the utter serene stillness of emptiness, while he's engaging, how's that possible? You can experience that so long as you're not in the analytical mode of doing things. You can even drop into that state of emptiness while you're walking. I hope that addresses some part of the question at least.
Thank you.
Yes, you're most welcome. I have to stop now. And sorry, my throat. I've been talking for the past 6 hours, actually 3 hours before we began the retreat, but this is good. So if you have any questions, please, and I didn't get a chance to respond or to address it even, please write me and I will do my best in responding. Okay, let us share and transfer some merits. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chiran rakantu desana. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chiran rakantu lokasasanam. Akasatha chabumata deva nagamahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well. May your practice grow. Trust yourself. Trust the process. Trust the process. Trust the heart, not this guy over here. Down a few inches. The chitta, the heart. Awakening is going to happen with a heart that is opening its doors. Lord Buddha said so many times today, self-confidence, self-confidence, self-confidence. Also trusting the teacher. And the greatest teacher you will find out is the one that beats in your heart. But you have to allow it to happen. Ultimately, as we saw in the Nibbāna Sutta, Lord Buddha was saying how we each have to be our own refuge ultimately. That's the ultimate sadhana, right? So I'll leave you with that, and until next time, be well.